Hi, welcome to Driven by me and Disease. Tonight I will go and continue where I left in the French live stream of the same topic. I did some more after the stream during my free time, and there are some that are very interesting. Some things I've seen. I don't want to go over them, what I've added since yesterday. I think I will do like probably a course with a pre-recorded stream video, so that way I can have like organized bullet points and things that are well done, easy to learn. So you will see in the live stream my process of getting the information. I might get information in other ways if I can. Eventually, I want to have something very good at the end. So I will keep going with it. So this one was very good. I will show you. This video, you don't see the title. Let's move myself out. If I look like that, is the streaming start? Seems that my stream not starting. Weird. Weird, sorry for that. It shows as if my stream is not running. Okay. It might be like the latency. I picked normal latency. So if I look at the screen that way, I think I'm in the right direction. I just want to have my face facing the screen. So this video was very good. It says for a platformer, but it can apply to other type of level design. There was very good points.
Level design is easily one of the hardest aspects of making a game. Coming up with fun mechanics is one thing, but making a fun level that utilizes all those mechanics is more challenging than you might think. There is, however, a secret technique I use when designing levels that totally changed the way I make games. So today, I'm going to tell you about my 5 core principles of level design that appear in all kinds of games. I guarantee that following these 5 principles will lead you to making great level designs in no time. If you learned something new in this video that helps you with designing your own games, consider subscribing to my channel for new game design videos every week. Alright, let's get started. For the first principle, let's talk about having a clear goal. Now, this might seem obvious at first glance, but it's actually something I think a lot of modern games get wrong. A clear goal is something for a player to always have in the back of their mind while playing through a level. At the end of the day, reaching that goal is the driving force that keeps the player engaged. So you want to make it as obvious as you can what that goal is right away. In the context of a game like Dark Souls, for example, the goal is to reach the next bonfire. It's a very clear visual cue to let the players know that they can finally relax again. Dark Souls actually has a few of these level design visual cues that quickly tell you what you're supposed to be searching for. A wall of fog tells you you've reached a boss of a dungeon.
Yeah, I note that from other video I watched yesterday. When I was at school, one thing the level designer teacher said, I remember, it was to lead the path with lights, like spotlights or physical lights that are turned on, so that way you can lead. You can put everything in the dark, not everything, but most of the level darker, and have spotlights that indicate. Another thing in the other video, one guy said put shiny thing like gold coins, collectibles.
And you need to prepare for a challenging fight. A hanging ladder means you might have a new shortcut you can use later. A clear goal can also be a cutscene for a story-driven game or a new upgrade for Metroidvanias. Think of dungeons from classic Zelda games. Most of the time, the door to the boss is right at the start of the temple, so even though there's going to be a long journey to find the boss key, you always have a clear image of where you want to.
Another one who said always show the issue, the problem before the solution. So don't give the player the key before seeing the lock, because it will confuse them and they won't even feel like they find the solution. Because if you give the key, they take the key, they say, oh, a key, then they go on with the level, they do things, and eventually when they arrive at the door, they already have the key to open it. So it's as if they forget, it's as if it had no utility. I see this often in puzzle games. My face is under is hidden. I will move my face. Where is my cursor? So I see this often in puzzle games, where you start the game and you find objects and you don't know what are they for, sometimes keys, and then you use them later. But that, I think it doesn't apply for puzzle games that are like Myst-like puzzle game. It applies for more like I would say Starfield, RPGs or action games, Doom-like games. Because I remember in the old Doom game, you had rooms that were locked, and you needed a colored key to open the colored door. Let's say it was a blue door, you needed to find the blue key. In Starfield, sometimes I don't listen to the characters, the NPCs, or skip, and then I don't care about finding the key. I know that eventually I will find it without thinking too much about the story, and that because I pick up everything, so I know that eventually I will have the key and I will open a door that is locked. It's not so bad. I think Starfield and Bethesda can do something that would heal this. It's not that is so bad, but it's not the best thing to have the game mechanics that are left to. I know there are things. It's not. It's because they sell a lot, so they might not care about it. But I would say one way to solve some kind of the problem of skipping through the people like me that would skip and eventually end up picking the key. It's that the issue with that is that I'm the kind of gamer that is made for me. Because I watch something else while I play. I do some work, like watching a thing while I play, watching some information thing, and so I know I need to skip the dialogues. But there are ways to make it more interesting, more important. There is an issue of maybe quantity over quality, but it's hard to tell. I will continue with just
want to get back to. But like I said before, finding a clear goal is something I think a lot of modern games get wrong. How many times have you played a game over the past couple years and asked yourself, what's the point of doing any of this? What am I working towards? Well, that leads us to the part 2 of having a clear goal.
I would add what I said. Keep simple geometry shape. I want to add don't show the solution before the problem. Add don't show the solution before the problem. I think I will add this video because I didn't see this video in this list, and I want to add the reference in my document. Not one.
Mood boarding is an.
I'm doing a mood board document too, but it's all in my document and the links in my description in YouTube. Duplicate, and it's 6 design, game design to avoid. I think it was something like that. It was a popular YouTuber. I think it might be this guy. Yeah, it's this guy. I will keep it to or rewatch again. He said good things. He's working on games, so who knows. He's talking from experience.
Hey everyone.
Somehow
Keeping the player's movement forward.
Everything is starting at the same time.
Enemy placements. That's.
I want to get them to check the proposed later. So I'm at this one. I will add it in the reference. Okay, copy is too much. Don't loop, copy.
goal, you have to properly reward the player for reaching it. Sometimes finding the shiny finish line isn't enough. You need rewards. Well, that leads us to, I think, a lot of modern games get wrong. How many times have you played a game over the past couple years and asked yourself, what's the point of doing any of this? What am I working towards? Well, that leads us to the part 2 of having a clear goal. You have to properly reward the player for reaching it. Sometimes
the last time I wonder what I was doing. The issue but in the game was that it was there was too many information on the screen. I would write it. I will put it at next to fill the space so it does not feel empty. That way, don't add too much information. Information and visual beauty or details is not the same, really. Information could be like mechanics, like things that seems to be like a mechanic of the game, and then you don't know if you need to use it or not. Too many mechanics. Many mechanics. Too many interaction.
finding the shiny finish line isn't enough. You need to incentivize your goals a bit more. Our mission as game developers, first and foremost, is to evoke an emotion for our players. What's the emotion a player feels when they see a bonfire in Dark Souls or a bench in Hollow Knight? By design, it's a feeling of relief, a reward for risking a dangerous journey with a moment of your goals a bit more. Our mission as game developers, first and foremost, is to evoke an emotion for our
May I add the props that evoke emotions? Add props, details. I would put props in brackets. Props and dynamic assets. Room, that could be a room type, environment, or biomes. I would add like examples when you see a bonfire. How do you write bonfire? Is bonfire? Yeah. So, in Dark Souls.
our players. What's the emotion a player feels when they see a bonfire in Dark Souls or a bench in Hollow Knight? By design, it's a feeling of relief, a reward for risking a dangerous journey with a moment of peace. Not only did you survive the challenge to get here, but you also now get all of your health back and a chance to level up. So my advice for the easiest way to set a strong goal for your level design is to 1. Make it as obvious as you possibly can, and 2. Make the goal worthy of being a goal. Regardless of what kind of game you're making, having a clear goal that the player can visualize in their head can be reason enough to keep playing your game.
Clear goal. I think I'm looking at my notes and I'm trying to think, is there a way to gather them into groups, different groups of things, like props thing? Eventually, when I will have enough. So what he said is easy, clear level, goals, easy to understand or clear, easy to memorize or easy to visualize and conceptualize, easy for the player to conceptualize in their brain. It depends, of course. When you know the rules, you can break the rules. There are games that are made to be complex, like Europa Universalis, which is a strategy game where you control a country, the resources of a country, and it's like a civilization but in high complexity, and you need to watch like videos to explain the game to you because it's too complex.
But properly rewarding your player for reaching that goal is just as important.
Properly reward the player for reaching that goal.
I mentioned this in my gameplay loop video a while ago, but if the player always has a goal to strive towards, a clear picture in their head of where they need to go next, there's a lot more of a chance of them seeing it through.
Clear picture in their head to where to go next.
Principle number 2, keep it fresh. Designing one level is easy enough, but giving each level their own identity and keeping the player
This I would add in another section, another place. There are simile section in my note. My cat is calling me. I need to open the door. So what did he said?
Excited to try new level enough, but giving each level their own identity.
I had a point where I talked about the theme of the level themes depending on your game type, because you might not want to add some themes because it applies to whole not open world type of games. So yes, that's why I had it depending on your game type.
It's got a game and keeping the player excited to try new level enough, but giving each level their own identity and
each level their own identity. Give each level their own identity. Even though you might do like open world, you can do the similar thing like in Baldur's Gate 3. There is the dark underground. I don't remember the name, but it has its own identity. It's like a level, their own identity. One way to do that would be give names to them. The name will help. So giving give name to the level to help giving building its identity. What was it in Baldur's Gate? It was the dark underground, underdark. Yeah, underdark. So it gives the identity. Start with the name. I remember in the lore there was a game, Torment, I think, in the same lore, and there was it was like a dark elf, and the dark elf lived in the Underdark RPG. What was this? Was it Torment? RPG. Blockout RPG old game, PC. I think it was Torment. Yeah, I think it was Planescape Torment. Let's see. Just sliding off the main subject a bit, like usual. Sigil. So Planescape Torment is primarily story-driven, with the combat taking a second role. The protagonist, known as the Nameless One, is an immortal man who forgets everything if killed. The game focuses on his journey through the city of Sigil and other planets to reclaim his memory of previous lives and to discover why he was made immortal in the first place. Several characters in the game may join the Nameless One on his journey. Most of these characters have encountered one on his journey most of these characters. I've encountered him in the past or have been influenced by his action in some way. The game was not a commercial success, but it received critic acclaim. What was it? Is it this game? It's Dungeon and Dragon. He's not an elf. He said it's a human. Where the player assigns attribute points. The nameless one starts the game as a fighter class, but the player may later freely change to thief, wizard, several potential companion. Planescape Torment is a present universe which consists of various planes of existence. The creatures which live in them, such as the devil, murderer, and the properties of the magic that infuse each plane. A large portion of Planescape Torment takes place in Sigil, largely located atop an infinitely tall spire at the center of the multiverse. So I saw out of this. Maybe I since I didn't play like from to the end, I never saw what it was. The Nameless was being able to join several of these factions. Organized is honored as one, a curse with immortality for thousands of years. Every time he dies, another person in the multiverse dies to fuel his resurrection. Upon rebirth, the Nameless one has little to no recollection of his past life, often with completely different personality than before. When the game starts, the Nameless one wakes in a mortuary. As a result, unless it latest death, he then sets out on a quest to discover how he died. It's so back. I'm not sure it's the same game I thought about. And 1999. Not so pixelated. So maybe it's another one. Let's find out. I cannot be another one. Maybe I read like the stories of the Dark Elf and I thought that I was a Dark Elf. When I started playing, I don't know. Don't know why. I don't know why I felt like it was the Underdark. It's so my memory it's a bit fuzzy. I didn't speak English back then, so might be a reason why. I want to see picture or let's play.
What if you could discover
just to see what how bad it was compared to my memory. I didn't remember animations, but it's not really good. Oh my god, the hand. This was how the 3D was made back in the days, and today it would be amateur 3D modeling. In that day it was professional. That's what professional 3D modeler. It's not even gameplay 3D modeling. It's animation 3D modeling. It didn't exist as this was pre-rendered, so it was the highest quality you could have. Oh my! Oh, it reminds me of the bad animation. Look at the blending between the shoulder and the skin blending there, and the hand coming up. This was check the blending of his hand. This was the top quality. They had to cut the finger to rotate it. Oh my! Aye. Oh no, it wasn't cut. I think they were able to animate. It was just the maximum bending they could do at that time. I don't remember this at all. I remember Baldur's Gate, which is older, but not this animation. Oh my god, it's not good. It feels like amateur, but amateur with time and money. If it was made today, at that time it was the top of the top. It was really no one. It was the top because they are the one who started. Now everyone's starting are newbies, and they do things. It's not newbies because it's a lot of details. That's why I say with time. It's just the color choices. They shouldn't have picked the blue, at least not the blue. Next, the yellow and red. Something different would be better. Let's see the gameplay. This. Let's see. I thought that was like a dark elf or something. I don't remember anything of that type. And nothing. Because I played just once and didn't finish it. I remember the whole game better. Let's see if I'm right. Let's see if I'm right. So you don't have to? What? Okay, but you really should. Yeah, it was a good game. I don't know if it aged well. Let's see. Remember, this guy was in the new one. I think it's. I don't know if it was there. It seems he was there. You couldn't have him. He has an hamster. He throw away his hamster at people. Let's Let's see if I remember. He didn't put the animation. This. I did it so many times that I remember all the faces. Yeah, I remember it's like printed in the back of my head, my visual cortex. I did this so many times. Yeah, everything is printed in my head. There's nothing surprising me. Oh, no animation. I want the animation. Remember, even at the time, I didn't find it very good. Intro. At least the intro. Sorry for that tangent. Oh yeah, this one. The rendering might looks fine. Enhanced. I think it was enhanced. Yeah, this was not. Black Eyes logo. Yeah, I remember a bit. Too many splash screen. Yeah, this one I've seen so many times. The animation is really bad. I remember this. He moves like really weird. We didn't have the technique back in those days. It's less worse than I remember. I remember back in the day I laugh at it even then. But now I'm not. I find it okay. Less worse than I thought. Let's see the remake. Just for fun. Is my face still under the logo? Yes, a bit. Wait a minute. Yeah, it seems that they put all the new skills, and just seeing this is like a money shot. Okay, let's move my head a bit. Let's say something like that. It's a bit like way back in the past. My stream. If you write and I don't reply right away, I either don't see your message or it's there is a latency. Okay, they cut everything, so it's no, they didn't. It's not better. They should have made it 3D. They should have made it 3D. Yeah, it's the same thing. But the new one, I'm so proud of it. They made it even better than the old. it's rare that this happens. That the another team is able to manage to make it even better. It's a bit buggy, some bugs, but the mechanics is perfect. Like the main idea is very good. I remember waiting for it for a long time and seeing the demo, and I was not sure, but when I played, it was clear. They made a good game. So we'll take a break now. I'll be back in a few minutes. Nothing, I will keep it. Let's continue.
Keeping the player excited to try new levels is the real challenge. If you look at a game like Super Mario, what's the main driving factor for the player? Throughout the game, there aren't any major upgrades or changes to the core mechanics, so how can we keep the game from getting stale? Well, that's where keeping things fresh comes into play. If every level has the same arts, the same challenges, or the same enemies, it's easy for a game to start feeling repetitive and even boring. Portal is another game that I think is a masterclass in level design. You unlock all the main abilities very early on in the game, but these abilities are so dynamic that you can use them in so many different scenarios. You start with a few tutorial-like puzzles where you learn some of the game's mechanics like momentum jumping or sneaking up on enemies, but later down the line, a level will mix these two concepts together to make something that feels completely fresh. So how can we do this for our own level designs? Obviously, not every game can have groundbreaking mechanics like the portal guns, but that doesn't mean we can't use these lessons in our own game. I think the reason that Portal works so well is that it keeps its cards close for a very long time. Instead of throwing all these puzzle ideas into the early levels, there's a slow progression to get there. When a new concept is introduced, like momentum jumping, it's only shown in the most bare bones way. Then you add something slightly different. You find out that other objects can be thrown with momentum. In the next level, you add timing with moving platforms. Then you combine objects with the timing. The best way to keep your games feeling fresh is to introduce each new concept a little at a time, and then combine
Keep each level is fresh. With different and mobs, art, and produce to keep a level fresh and produce each new mechanics one at a time.
them into something new. Instead of showing your hand right away, flip each card one by one to slowly reveal the bigger picture. By doing this, not only are you left with plenty of room for more unique levels, but the player will never get bored knowing that each level could be a brand new experience. Another game that does this really well is Celeste. Each level focuses on one new unique mechanic and slowly builds them to be more complicated. Think of the start of each level as basically a reset on what the player knows about the game and slowly introduce something new to mix things up. The third principle of level design is don't waste space. Believe it or not, this is unfortunately very easy.
This one I already have it from another. Don't waste space. Don't waste space. I had to fill the space so it does not feel empty from another guy
to fall into. I find myself doing it when designing levels all the time. The idea that bigger means better is just not true. Don't waste yours or the player's time with use
bigger. Does not mean better. Bigger room, bigger level does not mean better levels.
useless space. Whether you're making a small platformer or an open world RPG, it's tempting to make these big open areas that really have no reason to be there. It's a complaint I have with a lot of games. Why build a mountain if there's nothing on it? Why make a castle if there's no treasure inside? Let's use an example. What's the purpose of a village in an RPG? Well, its primary function is to restock on items, maybe sell some stuff, or stay at an inn. Let's start here. If a player wants to quickly buy some supplies, heal their party, and relieve their carrying weights, don't make them run back and forth just to do all that. Put it all in one place, and I promise they will thank you. If you're worried that having things so close together will make the
Yeah, it was from him. Put oops. Mutual interaction, mutual repetitive interaction goes together. So inventory, room, house, bank.
The scope of your game feels smaller, just look at the way real-life cities are designed. Among the thousands of streets in a city, there's usually one central market area that has everything you need. The only annoying part of the process is the walk to get there, so don't bore your players with unnecessary areas. Now don't freak out on me, but I've got a bone to pick with one of my favorite games of all time. Stardew Valley is great, and for the most part, I think the level design is really good. But there's this one stretch of land between your farm and the town that is just a drag to walk through. Sure, it's for the bus stop, but why does it need to be here? If I want to go grab some new seeds to plant, I don't want to spend an in-game half hour just to get there. Time is money, man. I want to be up at—
When you want to go back, you need to go back after work, and it's long, but it's part of the game a bit. But this part is long, but I don't know if you can remove it because there are things you have to access. You could have added like shortcuts that you can build or something.
At the caves by 3, and I've got to get back for my date with Penny at 6. So the moral of the story, don't make a player walk back and forth through nothingness. That isn't to say that all empty areas are a bad thing though. In Undertale, there's plenty of places where it's just a long stretch of walking, and it's actually used as a way to give the player a moment to reflect on the story. But again, that still gives it a purpose. If you do end up making areas of your game that feel like they don't quite have a purpose, your game might look more professional if you just trim things down a bit. The fourth principle of level design is following the flow. Here's an interesting piece of level design psychology. Have you ever noticed how most games seem to flow towards the right? It might sound crazy, but ever since early platformers
it might be like more psychological, but you will say it's psychological, but I think it's a good point. I did it the other way in my sketch of my game, and now I think I would have flipped it just to have the progression on from the left to right. I think my camera is inverted. No, but I'm looking at the mirror of myself, so it's inverted mirror. It's not if you. For me, if I put the words, it would be like reversed. Like, let's find something. I think it's reversed. Last time, I cannot put something it doesn't want. Does it take paper? Yeah. Okay, let's write something. I just want to know for myself. You cannot tell. My camera is reversed. I know it. I don't see it. Wait. I know it's reversed. Yeah. But it's like looking at the mirror. So
Super Mario were released, right? It might sound crazy, but ever since early platformers like Super Mario, here's an interesting piece of level design psychology. Have you ever known it might look more professional if you just trim things down a bit? The fourth principle of level design is following the flow. Here's an interesting
I will add this like the flow. It would be like a section, maybe. Follow the flow. Follow the flow. Left. Good. Right. I think people in other countries that reads from right to left would prefer flow on the other side.
piece of level design psychology. Have you ever noticed how most games seem to flow towards the right? It might sound crazy, but ever since early platformers like Super Mario were released, players became naturally inclined to move towards the right first. To Stardew Valley's credit, every morning you start on your farm and then walk towards the right side of the screen to visit the town. In Skyrim, as soon as you leave Helgen right after the dragon attack, you follow the path to the right to reach Riverwood. Some platformers even turn this concept on its head by hiding secrets on the left side of the screen. It's not like using this method can save you from poor level design, but if you ever want to guide your player towards one point of interest, try putting it on the right side, see what happens. But that's just one small piece of the puzzle. There's still hundreds of ways you can guide a player using psychology. For some reason, a lot of AAA games have defaulted to just throwing a bunch of points of interest on the map, and honestly, that ruins the fun of exploring things for yourself. There's nothing I hate more than when I'm looking more at a minimap than the game itself. It's a really tough problem to solve because obviously the developer wants to show the player where to find all the cool things they made, but at the same time, is it really worth overcrowding your players with an overwhelming amount of waypoints? On the flip side, having no waypoints might feel cleaner and more immersive, but that's at the risk of the players missing content completely. Here's the thing, if you want to turn your game into a unique experience for the player, you have to accept that players are going to miss things, and that's okay. In fact, it's all the more reason for them to want to explore your world, and even adds replayability. I recently played Dragon's Dogma 2, and while I do have some gripes with the game, I think the level design is really impressive. It's super rare to find a game that's so unapologetically okay with players missing out on content. If you pick up a new quest, instead of following a map marker, you actually need to listen to NPCs and find out more information. Making your way to each location actually feels like a puzzle in itself while you search for important landmarks and clues. You'll feel much more inclined to explore if your hand isn't being held the whole time. With that being said, there's also nothing wrong with slightly nudging the player in the right direction. It's easy to get lost playing Hollow Knight, but if you listen hard enough for audio clues, you might just hear humming from a nearby map maker. In Crosscode, each new zone is a tangled web of paths, but you probably didn't even realize that all these levels are carefully laid out and funneling you towards the exit. It's okay to lead a player in the right direction, you just gotta be a secret tour guide. If you give your levels a natural flow, players will probably follow it. And finally, the fifth principle of great level design, your game is a language. Every principle before this is important in its own way, but understanding the language of your game is by far the most essential way to design levels well. The truth is, level design is just another layer on the onion that is your game. You can have great looking art, a beautifully crafted story, fun mechanics, but the only way to make any of this matter is to find the synergy that brings all these elements together. Together, these components create the language of your game, a palette for which the player and the developer can both understand and feel confident in. I'll give you an example from my own experience. When I started building levels for my speedrunning platformer game Rem Runners, the levels were okay, but it definitely felt like something was missing. My original vision for the game was to be fast-paced, challenging, and satisfying, but the levels I made were really drawn out and confusing. To be honest, I was kind of just making things up as I went without any strong understanding of what I wanted out of the game. I was designing levels in a way that I've seen work in other games, but not levels that were suited to my own game. That's why understanding the language of your game is so important. If you're trying to make a fast-paced platformer with an emphasis on speedrunning, the levels need to reflect that. Don't use your level designs to pad for time or add meaningless content. Use them to heighten your original vision. A game like Vampire Survivors wouldn't work if there were a ton of obstacles and exploration. It's a big open space to make you feel like an unstoppable force. In Limbo, there aren't speed boosts or platforming challenges. Experience. When I started building levels for my speedrunning platformer game Rem Runners, the levels were okay, but it definitely felt like something was missing. My original vision for the game was to be fast-paced, challenging, and satisfying, but the levels I made were really drawn out and confusing. To be honest, I was kind of just making things up as I went without any strong understanding of what I wanted out of the game. I was designing levels in a way that I've seen work in other games, but not levels that were suited to my own game. That's why understanding the language of your game is so important. If you're trying to make a fast-paced platformer with an emphasis on speedrunning, the levels need to reflect that. Don't use your level designs to pad for time or add meaningless content. Use them to heighten your original vision. A game like Vampire Survivors wouldn't work if there were a ton of obstacles and exploration. It's a big open space to make you feel like an unstoppable force. In Limbo, there aren't...
I think to avoid it. This mistake, what he's talking about is to do the pillars of your game. Often it's 3 pillars. I did talk about it in my documentation. So if you think you are interested, let's check. It's my document. It's in the description in the video. Oops. Okay, it was, and I think it's the thing today. What is this name? It's okay, it's there. I think it's in the draft. Yes, of course. And in the description. The OGDT description, game overview, guideline coverage of genre, go. Let's see if my search system works. Yes, design PLRs. This is so cool. It works. It's just the ducks. Design PLRs. It's the game design direction. It's so huge that I forget where I put it because I rearrange everything so it's easier for me to patch in the draft the parts that I want to have in the draft. So the game PLRs, if you need to check what it is, it will help you to keep your focus on what your game needs to be. And I put an example from Subnautica's creators, which I like because it usually pillars it would be like short names like funny, active, puzzle, but they went with short sentences. So a title with short sentence, which I think it's really good because you can read it. If you've played, you understand. They want something precise, so this is a good way to do it. To have your 3 pillars. Many pillars will become a bit complex to maintain. Maybe you should try to keep it as low as possible. But here are examples. There are questions you can ask to find your pillar. But as I am showing in my documentation, I prefer to start with the draft, GDD draft, which is short and focus on the game mechanics only. I'm not finished yet. I'm putting it in practice at the same time as I'm doing it. So it's still in construction, so I think that will be soon it for tonight. It will be I will keep it short. I need a bit time for myself, so sorry for that if you wanted more. I think I will do a bit on my side tonight. So I will try to stay longer. I will try my best.
Speed boosts are in your original vision. A game like Vampire Survivors wouldn't work if there were a ton of obstacles and exploration. It's a big open space to make you feel like an unstoppable force. In Limbo, there aren't speed boosts or platforming challenges. It's a game that's supposed to make you feel small and helpless. When designing levels, you have to have a strong understanding of what you're trying to say with your game, instead of just following what has worked in the past. And well guys, that makes up my 5 principles of level design. If you follow each of these steps when designing your own levels, then I'm confident that you're on.
Next one, JDC. I remember I watched it long ago, but I remember he said good.
Hello, my name is Nick Awaijin. I'm a game designer at that game company, and today I'm going to talk to you all about cognitive maps and how to prevent your players from getting lost in your levels. So as I said, I'm a game designer at that game company, but before I was a game designer, I was actually in architecture. And so a lot of the references and imagery and knowledge that I'll be using in this presentation actually come from the domains of architecture and urban.
GDC is a really good source of information. on many different things on video games, about video games.
And planning. One of my big interests has always been wayfinding and navigation, which is how we get here. So we're going to jump right in, and let's first start by defining what maps are. So firstly, a map is a tool. A map helps you achieve something. Most of the time, it's orienting yourself in relation to other things. A map is made, so I can't go out into nature and find a map just sitting there on the ground. It's either made by me or by somebody else. It represents spaces or concepts. It's pretty self-explanatory, and it's relational. So if I show you a piece of paper and it's got a dot on it, and that dot is labeled Paris, that isn't a map just yet. However, if I show you that same piece of paper with a dot that says Paris and another dot that says Cairo, now we're beginning to form a map, and those two dots can begin to anchor each other in space. Also, a map has edges or limits. Even if it's a globe, which is a map of the entire Earth, you're going to be limited by how much information you can get at particular scales, etc. There are a couple things maps aren't. So maps aren't, quote, the truth. They are not always orthographic. So that kind of top-down view of something without any perspective that we associate with maps, maps don't always have to be that. They're not always flat. That Polynesian stick chart that I'm showing on the top right is an example of a kind of three-dimensional, very tactile map that maps ocean swells and islands to help navigators navigate wide expanses of ocean, for example. They're also not always physical, which means that they can take place in our minds, which is, as you guessed, what a cognitive map is, and it's prescriptive. So if I show you a map of a part of the world that you're unfamiliar with, and I label something incorrectly, as far as you're concerned, that incorrect label is reality to you. So let's talk about cognitive mapping. This term was originally coined by Edward Tolman in his lab in 1948. So if you've seen imagery of rats in a maze running around trying to get a piece of cheese, this is where it comes from. So the experiment was as follows. They would take a rat and place a rat in the apparatus that you see on the top left, this kind of circular room, and they would hide a piece of cheese where that letter G is located in that yellow diamond. And the rat would eventually find that piece of cheese, and then once consumed, once the cheese was consumed, they would put the rat back in the circle and have the rat do this over and over until it was almost like muscle memory. The rat would go in and knew exactly what routes to take, and it would get the cheese. Then they would take that same rat and put it in the apparatus that you see in the middle. So it's that same kind of rounded room, but that original pathway was now blocked. The researchers wanted to know, would the rat, once it realizes that path is blocked, have some sort of intuition as to where this piece of cheese was? And if it did, it would probably bias channel 6, which is geographically where you would go if you just wanted to get the cheese. But if it didn't, if the rat didn't have a kind of understanding of what its world was in its own mind, it would just bias all of the paths equally. And as the researchers and Tolman found out, rats did create some sort of mental map of their environment. As you can see on the bar on the right-hand side, that really tall bar is how many times those rats picked Avenue 6. So that is what these cognitive maps are for rats. But of course, we're not rats. We are people. We have our own people brains, and we inhabit non-trivial spaces. We live in cities, suburbs, all kinds of different environments that demand us to use our own cognitive maps on a daily basis. So we can do a little exercise to help you understand what your own cognitive map is like. So take 5 minutes and draw your neighborhood from memory on a piece of paper. Don't look anything up. Just try to let your mind guide your hand, and just spend 5 minutes to do that. So if you want to do that exercise, go ahead and pause the video now. If you've done that exercise, you might have a drawing similar to the illustrations we see here on the top. These illustrations actually came from The Image of the City, which is a book that urbanist Kevin Lynch published. And Kevin Lynch went to a bunch of cities and asked people to do this very same thing. Hey, can you draw me your neighborhoods? And after parsing through all of those different illustrations, he was able to discern 5 elements that people use to make sense of the spaces around them: paths, landmarks, districts, edges, and nodes. The rest of this talk is going to explain each one of these elements in detail and how we can use those to make really strong, cohesive cognitive maps. But of course, this talk is also about not getting lost, so we need to explain what getting lost is. Now that we have a clear idea of a cognitive map, getting lost is simply a misalignment of your cognitive map with what the world around you is, with your surroundings. It's that feeling of feeling like an area or a space is new, but knowing for a fact that it isn't, and it's generally a bad time. This can result from changes in your environment or changes in your place within the environment, or it can result from insufficiently broad or insufficiently clear cognitive maps because you're unable to respond to those changes in an adequate way. Similar to this image, which is a map of the world. It's upside down. We might be able to tell it's a map of the world, but I'd be really hard pressed to identify any particular country with the map upside down. So let's talk about the first element. The first are paths. This is also the most self-explanatory element. It's a linear space that directs movement and travel, and it also tends to be dominant in cognitive maps. If you did the exercise earlier, one of the first things you might have done was started diagramming all of the paths that you are aware in your neighborhood. And these are things like sidewalks, streets, trails, etc. Travel tends to be concentrated on them, and because of that, we tend to treat them differently. We pave our roads, we cut channels to make sure that water can flow through correctly, that sort of thing. And interestingly enough, paths are the most temporal element. So a path isn't useful to you if you're not, moving along it, and moving along a path is inherently tied to time. And so that process of incrementing your way along a path is what Lynch called scaling. There are a few limitations, though, when we're dealing with paths. We kind of digest them and use them in two ways. One is dead reckoning, and the other is path integration. And they're technically different, but for the sake of this presentation, we can just think about both of these concepts as knowledge that where I am now is where I was previously, plus all of the steps that I took since that last reference point. This relies on continuity, proprioception, or a good understanding of your own body and its movement throughout spaces, a calculation, intuition, etc. However, it can be difficult or impossible to properly utilize a map using these techniques without knowledge of those things. And a lot of times in games in particular, I might not be fully aware of the movement mechanics. I might not be fully aware of how the camera or the player or what have you that I'm controlling can experience that space. And so my sense of proprioception there is really limited. So we should keep that in mind when we're using paths. So how can they help us, prevent players from getting lost? Paths are really good at catching or using playing. Might not of those things. And a lot of times in games in particular, I might not be fully aware of the movement mechanics. I might not be fully aware of how the camera or the player or what have you that I'm controlling can experience that space. And so my sense of proprioception there is really limited. So we should keep that in mind when we're using paths. So how can they help us, prevent players from getting lost? Paths are really good at catching lost players. You can think of, being lost in a desert. If you're lost in a desert.
This is good. Paths are good for catching lost players.
You really just need to pick a direction and start walking because you don't know where to go. But once you come across a path or a street, you've automatically eliminated one vector from your field of possibilities. So now you just have to choose, am I going to go
path slash streets? That way it's more broader than just path.
left or am I going to go right? So having a path is a really good way to catch players who might be deviating away and starting to get lost. Obviously, paths also do great level design things like establishing player flow and connecting large areas together, etc. Inadequate pathing in your space can make it difficult to connect areas of the cognitive map together, and we have those limitations from dead reckoning and path integration that manifest themselves even more in games. One of the things to look out for as well with paths is that moving one way along a path does not necessarily mean moving the other way. If you've had the experience of going on a hike, reaching the end destination, turning around and going back, and not being fully sure if you're going down the same trail, you've experienced this. So just because you've placed paths inside of your level doesn't automatically mean that players suddenly won't get lost. You need to make sure that you're addressing that concern as well. The next element are landmarks, also super self-explanatory and loved by level designers all over the place. They're single, localized, and
adding landmarks to help lost players. There was another guy who said adding set pieces. Set pieces are large, decorative, perhaps beautiful to look at. It's similar to. So I will add set pieces to set pieces, landmarks, and set pieces. I will take a little break. I will be back soon.
memorable features. Paths were these linear elements. Now we've got point references with these landmarks. They tend to be things you want to take pictures of, and they're recognizable either visually, excuse me, narratively, or experientially. It can be this Randy's Donuts shop, or it could be the bench that the character had their first kiss in, for example. Landmarks can be useful in a number of different ways. One of those is orienting players from a distance. A lot of the times, landmarks are tall, and so you can see them from far away, which is great.
And mark up and the player from a distance. Like that you like light in the sky.
But a lot of the times, landmarks can be useful in a number of different ways. One of those is orienting players from a distance. A lot of the times, landmarks are tall, and so you can see them from far away, which is great. But they're also useful for orienting players when they're going down new paths and new journeys. So if I'm going to an area that I haven't been to before, but I maintain a reference point in a previous landmark that I've already established, that'll help anchor the new information that I'm receiving in relation to that previous landmark. Also, they tend to situate elements of your spaces among themselves, which is super important. But also to note, landmarks are essentially only useful if they're stationary. So if you've got a large creature, let's say, that is walking around a big map, that creature is no longer that useful as a landmark because it's moving all the time. Also, they're much better when they're directional. So I have this Statue of Liberty here in the Eiffel Tower. The Eiffel Tower is radially symmetric. So if I'm north of the Eiffel Tower looking back, or I'm south of the Eiffel Tower looking back, the Eiffel Tower is basically going to look the same to me. But if I'm north of the Statue of Liberty and I'm south of the Statue of Liberty, the way that the Statue of Liberty is made makes it very easy for me to discern that, hey, I'm in a different spot now. So whenever you can, if making
better, it is better if the landmark is symmetrical with about sides having different back and front side.
Making sure that people can use that landmark to situate themselves around it is important to you. Try to make your landmarks directional. Lastly, photogrammetry is the process of taking multiple pictures of an object and then making a 3D model from that. You want to think of your landmarks in a similar way. If a landmark is only referenced one time, it's not really going to be useful for the player to create their own cognitive map. You want to make sure they're able to reference it as many times as possible so that that reference point can be continually reinforced. Next up, we have districts. This is also self-explanatory. A district is a region identified by a characteristic or quality, and we have
district identified by
point references with landmarks, linear reference. A district is a region identified by a characteristic or quality, and we have a
region defined by similar sets of content.
Point references with landmarks, linear references with paths, and now we've got these zonal references with districts. Here are a bunch of examples: industrial zones, downtowns, nature preserves.
I'm just organizing a bit. Following.
Reserves, etc. A good way to identify districts is to do what I call the squint test. So if you look at your map and you squint your eyes and everything gets all blurry, if you can start to distinguish different parts of that map, like this area's a little red, this area's looking a little different, you can most of the time assume that those are your districts. The districts have edges, and you go through them. So you enter into these new kinds of spaces. They tend to be mid to large scale. And another good way of thinking about districts is a color by number image. So a color by number image is a kind of cohesive and consistent portrait as a whole, but it's comprised of these unique and recognizable colors that work together to make it all work out. Likewise, in our cognitive maps, having clear districts really helps to differentiate areas from each other. An important thing with districts is the concept of clustering. So I have two clusters here. I've got a set of 5 clusters on the left and a set of 5 clusters on the right. And the set of clusters that are on the left are way easier to remember than the ones on the right. And that's because they are grouped with like objects. This type of clustering can be semantic or mechanical, not just visual. So, it doesn't just have to be, 3 pyramids here and 3 box buildings over here. It can be, this is an area that I can jump really high. This is an area where I get in cars and drive around, etc. Isolating these qualities in different areas like this is just generally good practice for world building and game design. But it really helps reinforce a cognitive map because I could probably navigate away from this slide, and because they're clustered in such a way, the image on the left might still be something to remember, whereas the image on the right, you might forget the moment that I move away from it. Second to last, we have edges. So an edge is a linear reference, but it's not a path. These tend to control continuity, or they separate things. Examples are gates, walls, cliffs, borderlines, etc.
Edges, gate, walls,
etc. And have edges. So an edge is a linear reference, but it's not a path. These tend to control continuity, or they separate things. Examples are gates, walls, cliffs, borderlines.
Are not bugs. Ratings. It's obvious.
Borderlines, etc. And they tend to be elevational simply because we tend to move around the world horizontally. So if we flew around a lot or climbed a lot of trees, edges could be barriers that are horizontal. But most of the time, they're vertical things. It's stuff that you tend to go around or go along, or things that you go through. For example, being on the outside of a building, opening a door, and entering inside of that building. You want to be deliberate when you're working with paths. Crossing that threshold of a path, or of an edge, crossing that threshold of the edge, and or being blocked by the edge are really memorable experiences if that edge is really crisp and clean. I notice that sometimes we have this tendency to want to blur things. Like we don't want these hard lines cutting through our landscapes. And this isn't to say that you need to make hard lines, but you should be deliberate in the limits and boundaries of these districts in the form of these edges. Because if the edges are blurred, the cognitive map of players is also going to reflect that blurred nature, and it's not going to be as good at anchoring them when they do start.
Don't make edges.
Getting lost. These occur a lot in games. There's level transitions, level boundaries, mechanical boundaries, portals, ledges, walls, cliffs, etc. So we have plenty of opportunity to liberally use edges, and we want to take full advantage of those. And lastly, we have nodes. So a node is a convergence of paths. It's a point reference, but
Nodes conversion. Conversion. How do you write conversion?
It's a point reference that is defined by paths, which is the other element. Most of the time, these are things like traffic intersections, transit hubs, or home spaces or hub spaces that allow you to access multiple different locations of the game from one spot. If there is a place that has many ins or many outs, that's usually a node. They tend to be denser than the adjacent areas just because these are places that players and people flock to when they're navigating in general. So they're good to have. Excuse me. There's that expression, all roads lead to Rome. And in this example, Rome is a node. Having a location that is repeatedly used by people on their way to get somewhere is really important and really valuable. So when you're making a node, or when you've recognized that you have created a node in a game that you're working on, you really want to start working on placemaking there in order to make it as recognizable as possible. These nodes can be destinations. They don't just have to be things that you go in or go through. And a good way to facilitate that is just make sure that people can spend some time there, as opposed to just be transient and move through something. I've been on plenty highway intersections, having grown up my whole life in LA, but if you were to drop me in one of these big highway interchanges, I might be hard pressed to know where I am without all the signage. So if you're going to make a node, try to turn it into a place and not just some arbitrary thing you pass through. So those are the 5 elements. What they are, how you can identify them, how you can leverage them, and why they're useful. But now let's talk about more specifically implementing them.
I want to add up to the nodes. The number of paths connected to a node should be. I've seen one of the level designer I worked with talking about how people will tend to forget or get lost when the number gets higher than around 4. And I later saw a video that confirmed this.
Hey smart people, Joe here. I want to do a little experiment on you. I'm gonna flash some images and I wanna see if you can tell how many dots are in those images. Okay, and another one. One more. Okay. Okay, and another. There's a really interesting surprise hidden in this test. For 1, 2, or 3 dots, I bet you were able to count them pretty much instantly without even thinking about it. Maybe even for 4, but 5 starts to get a little bit harder. And once we get to 8, there's just not enough time to process the dots. Just kidding. There were actually only 7 dots in that last one. All right, try this. You can count the number of each color star almost instantly, but counting the total number of stars takes way more concentration or not as accurate. Psychologists have done these tests on huge numbers of people, going back more than a century ago, and they find it takes people basically the same amount of time to recognize 1, 2, or 3 dots or shapes or objects. But beyond 3, we very quickly answer slower. We start to make mistakes. Why do scientists care about having people count dots? Well, there's a surprising and profound secret hiding in these little experiments. Hints of a strange way that we count and think about numbers. Deep in some unconscious part of our brains, we have a weird ancient way of representing the muchness of something that goes way back in our evolution before we ever wrote numbers down, even before humans existed. And it can explain this.
Bonjour, je m'appelle Alexandre et je suis diplômé.
Mini agro. I don't remember searching about farming. Why do they aim at me with agriculture?
Numerals. The first 3 numerals make sense. It's just tallying up ones. The sticks and bones show that ancient humans were using tally marks to keep track of numbers as far back as 40,000 years ago. But why is 4 written as this instead of this? At 4, instead of just tallying up the marks, suddenly we have to do subtraction, take 1 away from 5. It's not exactly difficult, but it's weird. Well, maybe abandoning tally marks after 3 was just a Roman thing. If that's true, then how do you explain this? They stop straight tally marks after 3 or 4 too. Well, surely our number system doesn't follow this weird pattern, right? Well, 1 is obviously a tally mark, right? But 2 and 3, well, you might be surprised to learn that those actually derive from 2 or 3 horizontal bars that became tied together when written by hand. It can't be a coincidence that all these distinct cultures somehow came to this same conclusion. They all switch from tallies to symbols after 3 or 4 in order to be quickly understood by our brains. This is a hint that there's something weird and special about how our brains recognize and represent numbers. We're going to explore a bunch of weird things that you don't realize that you do when you think about numbers, and then discover a pretty surprising answer to why your brain does this. It seems like for a few objects, we don't actually have to count them one by one. We just see them all at once without counting. But for 4 or more objects, we can't quickly and reliably name the number that we see. Things start to get approximate. Okay, try to decide which of these groups has more dots. Now do the same thing for these two. You can more easily distinguish 2 distant numbers than 2 closer numbers. All right, that's not too surprising. Now do the same thing with these 2 set of dots. Which has more? And what about these 2 sets of dots? That one was much easier, wasn't it? Yet both of those pairs differ by the exact same amount, 10 dots. Even though the difference between them was objectively the same, we have a harder time distinguishing 2 larger quantities. We invented calculus, but we can't tell 90 from 100 dots. I mean, a computer could do that, easy, but not us. Okay, comparing dots is hard, maybe. Surely we're real pros when it comes to comparing actual numbers. I mean, we see digits everywhere, every day. I don't look at dots all day. Here's another experiment. Give people 2 digits that are far apart, and they can quickly figure out which one is bigger. But when the digits are close together, people take longer to figure out which is bigger. It gets weirder. It takes us longer to compare larger numbers versus smaller ones. Even if they're only 1 apart, comparing 3 and 2 takes less time than 4 and 5, which takes less time than 8 and 9. Researchers have tested tons of people on these things, and essentially everyone takes longer to compare larger numbers or numbers that are closer together. And we aren't consciously aware we're slower, but the computers don't lie. It happens with bigger numbers too. When people are asked whether a 2-digit number is larger or smaller than 65, the closer the number is to 65, it takes more time to answer. This isn't what we'd expect if we were just comparing the number symbols, or if we were computing the difference with subtraction or something. It's as if when we see any number greater than 3, we automatically translate them into some sort of quantity. And this is what leads to confusion when comparing numbers. Here's a very weird question. What number subjectively feels closer to 10? 9 or 11? Most people answer that 11 feels closer, even though they both differ by 1. If you don't believe me on that one, which of these numbers feel closer together? 9 and 10 or 99 and 100? Same objective difference, but most people answer that the larger numbers feel closer. If you ask lots of people to select numbers at random between 1 and 50, we tend to pick smaller numbers more than larger ones, which is definitely not random. As if we have a jar of numbers in our head where small numbers are overrepresented. And we can demonstrate this small number bias in a different way too. If I give you 2 different series of numbers, which one looks like it most evenly covers the range between 1 and 2,000? Take a look at them for a moment. Most people respond that this series is more evenly spread out and more random. The other series has way too many large numbers, right? Actually, the top series is the one which more evenly samples the range. The other series oversamples small numbers. Second series just feels better to us because smaller numbers feel farther apart, and we kind of compress large numbers together. It's almost like we think logarithmically. Is that why our banknotes and coins are divided up like this? Well, sure, part of that is because you can combine small units to make bigger ones, but it feels like money covers the range pretty evenly, doesn't it? Really makes you start asking questions, huh? Don't worry, it's about to get even weirder. Let's do another experiment. Your task is to determine whether a number is larger or smaller than 55. Hit the button in your right hand if it's larger, and the button in your left if it's smaller. Okay, smaller, bigger, that one's bigger, smaller again, bigger again, that one's smaller, that one's smaller, bigger. But what happens if I switch the buttons? So now you hit the right button if it's smaller, and the left button if it's bigger. Well, people answer significantly faster if right means larger. It's as if you have a literal number line in your head, because that's how we write the number line. Bigger is to the right. Conclusion is obvious. When you compare two numbers, you aren't computing them or subtracting them. You are physically comparing them in space. Okay, well maybe that's because most people are right-handed. Except left-handers show the same right equals larger reflex. And when people cross their hands, they still answer larger faster for whatever hand is physically on the right side of their body. That's your right, but is this because basically from birth, we're programmed everywhere we look to think of bigger numbers on the right? And guess what? People from cultures where they learn to read right to left show the opposite. They tend to associate larger numbers with the left because their mental number line goes the opposite way. This is really weird. Of course, humans have two ways of thinking about numbers. We have specific words and language and symbols we use, like 3 or 7 or 99. But humans have only been using these words and symbols for a few thousand years at the most. And psychologists have gathered a lot of evidence that we have these other, more ancient, abstract ways of thinking about numerical quantities, this number sense that sort of hides under the surface and pokes through in some weird ways. We know this abstract number sense is pretty ancient because cute little babies have shown that they have an innate sense of numbers long before they recognize words or symbols. And even other animals can count and keep track of the muchness of things. For a long time, people thought babies were born, well, totally dumb, that their brain was like a blank page, and they only figured out that objects exist and how they interact with each other by observing their environment. Now, babies are not smart, and I'm allowed to say that because I've raised two of them, but newer science has shown that even at birth, they have some kind of idea of numbers. Like if I put these 2 rows of M&Ms in front of a 2-year-old, they're gonna pick this row every time. I mean, they're not idiots. If you show an infant a bunch of cards with 2 objects, and then suddenly throw in a card with 3 objects, they just stare at the one with 3, like, whoa, something's clearly different here. Infants can even do addition. Show a 4 or 5-month-old a toy, then hide it. Now move another toy behind that hidden area. If you reveal 2 toys behind the card, baby's like, this is all good, nothing's amiss here, but do some trickery and reveal just 1 toy, and they're like, whoa, hold on a sec, what tomfoolery is afoot here, Mrs. Scientist? Babies clearly understand that 1 + 1 doesn't equal 1. It's not exactly linear algebra, but we clearly have an innate sense of quantity before we can speak or read numbers, or go pee-pee in the potty. We even see hints of number sense in other animals too. But strangely, these other species show some similar patterns to what we see in humans in a test like this. Quickly quantifying 1 to 4 objects, but becoming slower and less accurate for more objects. Given 2 choices, wild monkeys will choose the container containing more apple slices, as long as each container contains fewer than 5 pieces. Huh, schooling fish will always join a bigger group with 3 rather than 2 fish, or 4 rather than 3. But to choose the larger school beyond that, the difference has to be 8 versus 4 fish, or 16 versus 8 fish. As if they're using one way of counting small numbers and a different, more fuzzy way of quantifying large numbers, just like we do. Scientists believe humans and other animals share 2 kinds of innate number senses. One is used to represent exact quantities from 1 to 4. This might be why crows can count out up to 4 caws in response to different prompts, or why even simple-brained animals like bees can count up to 4 landmarks while navigating to food sources. The other number sense is more approximate. It's better at estimating the differences in quantities. This is why chimpanzees will only attack an intruder if they outnumber him 3 to 1 or more. Or why most animals can judge which choice has more food, where the most predators are, or where the least rival mates are. In cases like these, fuzzier estimates of magnitude are often good enough. Scientists are still just starting to scratch the surface when it comes to understanding how universal this innate number sense really is among other animals. But they are starting to understand that some parts of animal brains contain number neurons that are specially tuned to fire strongly in response to one number. And other parts of the brain that are used to compare the size of objects or that let us move in space, they are also used when we compare approximate quantities. These regions of the brain are connected to many other senses, which is why counting is something we can do not just for what we see, but for what we hear or what we touch too. Understanding where our innate number sense comes from is important because 3 to 7% of people suffer from a learning disorder called dyscalculia, which prevents them from understanding numbers and doing math, which can obviously be a big hurdle in their future. But it is humans who invented a language and series of precise symbols to represent numbers. And once we learn how to use them, those symbols let us deal with precise numbers, small or large or gigantic ones even, and combine and manipulate and measure them in complex ways with little to no fuzziness or approximation. That very same symbolic precision has allowed us to do all of this science that let us understand all these hidden and innate number senses that we aren't conscious of. Symbolic language has even taught us why we have number symbols in the first place. Or to put it another way, what numbers are even for. Stay curious.
In our design practice. So the first thing I like to do is do an audit, try to look at levels and spaces that I've already made and identify existing paths, landmarks, districts, edges, and nodes in those areas. Then once I've done that, I want to assess the clarity and readability of those things. If I'm kind of doing this audit and then I'm saying that could be a landmark or that looks like a good enough district, etc., it probably isn't a good enough landmark and it probably isn't a district. So that's a key for me to go back and clarify those things. Really not be shy about these design decisions that I'm making. Then I want to organize my space. So I tend to work, because of the architectural background, I like to work in plan first, and I like to think of plan as the organization or structure for everything. I think the plan should be clear and legible, and by looking at that plan, you should be able to easily recognize almost all of these elements there. Once the plan kind of really pops with all of these elements and they're really distinct, then I like to move on to section. And section is where I think the emotion comes out, where the storytelling happens, where the experience really takes place. Just because I've got one of these elements in my plan, it doesn't mean it's actually going to come through in my section when I'm experiencing the game. So if I see on my plan there's this really strong landmark, but then when I start playing the game, that landmark isn't really reading, that's a key to me to go back and edit that landmark to make sure that it's legible when I'm playing the game. Speaking of playing the game, it's super important to test, if you can, without a HUD or a minimap or UI, etc. Why is this? A couple of things. Using tools like a radar, GPS, or a minimap can lead us into digesting spaces using an egocentric frame of reference as opposed to an allocentric frame of reference. So what do these mean? Egocentric frame of reference means I'm the center of the universe, and the universe kind of revolves around me as I go through it. If you've used a GPS navigation system on your phone, that's egocentric. This can be difficult because you're navigating in this piecemeal fashion where you're primarily focused on what your next maneuver is going to be. I need to turn right in 500 feet and turn left, etc. And breaking down the journey in that way has been shown to result in a decrease in route memory. It can also disengage you from the environment because you're exploring the map or the UI.
I don't think it's level design so much. I would say it's gameplay, and it's true that when you follow someone, you won't remember as much as the person leading you, because you don't practice active learning but the person leading you to practice active learning.
UI or the HUD instead of the space itself. What you're trying to do is actually take that triangle and move it to that circle, and your character moving through the world is just a byproduct of you trying to get those shapes to align. However, if you test without the aid of a heads-up display, etc., you tend to do more allocentric mapping. Allocentric mapping is, I am not the center of the world. The world exists, and I am simply moving through it. It's this kind of big picture navigation. And when you do things this way, there tends to be an increase in route memory. You're engaged more with your environment, and you're exploring the space instead of just exploring the map itself. I have this image here of the fish in the lake and the bird in the trees. So the fish in the lake can see the bird in the trees, and it can see the trees, but it can't see the lake because that's where it is. Likewise, the bird can identify the fish and the lake, but not the forest, because it's understanding things egocentrically. What we want to do to get a clear picture of everything is try to get what the image in the center is, which is essentially an allocentric frame of reference, which is, this is the environment and the player is simply moving through the environment. So the TLDR of this talk is, one, there exist things called cognitive maps. It is the digestion of the environments that you go through that exist in everybody's head. Getting lost is when that cognitive map is misaligned with the environment, is misaligned with what the environment is currently telling you. So how can we prevent players from getting lost? Well, we can try to foster clearer cognitive maps. And how can we do that? We can use a toolkit using paths, landmarks, districts, edges, and nodes to make sure that our spaces are robust and can actually foster these robust cognitive maps. And a good way to do that is just be deliberate. I've included this lovely food tray here because I could take the same food tray with all of those same ingredients and just kind of like mix it all up in there, and so everything's all up on top of each other and blended. But it wouldn't be as appetizing, first of all. And secondly, it wouldn't be as memorable to me. Excuse me. It would have the same nutritional value, but by virtue of the way it's organized, it's not going to read as clearly. And with this one, I can do my squint tests, and I can begin to start making out districts. I can kind of start to make out landmarks, even with this food. So you can really apply these design strategies to nearly everything. Lastly, I wanted to just show you all of these different references that I have used to try to understand these things for myself. These are all people who are way more intelligent than I am. And if you're interested in pursuing this topic further, I would encourage you to go here. Here are a bunch of more names that you should continue to take a look at. Go ahead and pause the video. And any one of these is going to be an exciting paper for you to enjoy. So I'll go back. Thank you very much. I hope that this helped enlighten you and helped you understand how to prevent your players from getting lost and introduce a new paradigm for understanding how you
through your life. Keeping the player's movement forward through your level naturally and effortlessly is very important. With a high pace, high speed running, jumping and climbing game like Mirror's Edge, keeping that momentum and flow without abruptly stopping them is essential, especially for
the momentum and the first player movement constant.
for games without jumping and climbing game like Mirror's Edge, keeping that momentum and flow without abruptly stopping them is essential, especially for a game that doesn't have a radar or an on-screen indicator where to go. So you have to be more vigilant.
No minimap. And take it through where.
And deliberate in showing where the player needs to go. And to me, Mirror's Edge is like a racing game, but on your feet. So in the game, when you're running fast, you have to make, in the moment, split-second decisions where to go and where to jump. But when you have to stop and look where you should go next, because it's not clear, flow and momentum is disrupted. This is fine for some games, but not for Mirror's Edge. So the level design mistake I learned to avoid playing Mirror's Edge is placing where the player needs to go next outside their view.
Atera is the IT painkiller. Remote monitoring and management, remote access, help desk and ticketing.
For most of Mirror's Edge, there is a natural and effortless flow from one building to another and from one red object to the next. But when this movement is interrupted due to having to stop, look, and figure out where you need to go next, it's very noticeable. And it's like hitting a brick wall at a high speed. So let me give you a few examples, and then I will show you a very easy and simple level design principle to fix it. The first example of disruption of momentum and flow is in the flight chapter. Right after you meet with your sister, you are confronted by guards. You jump down, and you're now being chased through the offices. Most of this chase sequence flows naturally, where you intuitively know where to go next. But when you come to this section, you miss where you're supposed to go. You jump up, go to the left, only to realize that this is not the way to go. The path to take was off to the right, completely outside your view. You took the path of natural flow and it led you to a dead end. Now, after the first few playthroughs and failures, I realized there is an open door off to the left, or that I could bust through the glass, or the guards end up shooting the glass out. But when I played for the first time, and in the heat of the chase, it was not clear to me, and the path of least resistance was for me to jump up and pull myself to the second floor. And all of this could have been avoided with a clear framing of where I'm supposed to go as soon as I turn this corner. Just place my exit, my path, in my view. Don't hide it. So flow was disrupted. The second example is in the same level, a little further down, when you make your way outside.
It's interesting. To keep the flow. So put the next place to go in the center view. Or be clear. I not leaving somewhere else.
And you're being chased by the helicopter. Most of the running, jumping, sliding and climbing you do here is effortless. You just know where to go and what to do next. Until you reach this section. You jump across onto another building and there's no way out. You can go through the door only to realize that the path you are to take now is right behind you. And again, outside your view. Flow and momentum are disrupted. Third example is in the heat chapter. You are being chased by the helicopter. Most of this run is exhilarating, and most importantly, it's natural, effortless, as you make your way across one building, over the fences, from one red object to the next, until you reach this section, where you make your way across the red beam, then climb up the construction supports. You continue forward the same way you climbed up. Helicopter appears right in front of you and shoots a hole through the tarp. You run past it, turn to the right, go down, only to find it's not the way to go. Again, the path you were to take was right behind you, outside your view. But you wouldn't know this because the level design instructed you to look in one direction and then continue with the path of least resistance, guiding you forward, to the right, and in the wrong direction. Flow is disrupted. Again, so you can see there's a pattern here.
They made the mistake that another one said it's to not make put useless space where with nothing, and he gave like tips and saying you could put like a collectible if you need the space, but don't do dead ends.
The last example is at Eden Mall. After you are shot at and pressured to take the elevator, you run away to create some distance. You jump down to the lower level, and as you continue you run, you go up the stairs with the natural flow of the layout, but you are stopped by a dead end. Once again, the path you needed to take was right behind you. Flow is disrupted. Now, I wouldn't mind these examples so much if they were during the parts of the game where making split-second decisions are not vital, but they are, and they kill the momentum and flow. I want to run fast through these sequences, and I want to enjoy to replay them over and over again just to feel the speed of the run without stopping. I want to see how fast I can go and how cool I can make each run. It's like if you ever played the first level of Mario 1.1, where it's fun to just press forward and see how fast you can run to the end of the level without stopping. And I get it that once you know where to go, it doesn't matter that much. You just run, turn around, continue on your path. But during the first playthrough, these examples and a few more were frustrating because the next step to take wasn't clear, as it was often not within my view. And these issues are easily fixable, so here is how I would fix it. As the player enters into a new area, new part of the level, give an indication where they should head to. Frame the player's point of view so they can see where they need to go as soon as they enter into new playable space. Not behind them, outside their view, but within their field of vision. This may require reworking your geometry, so the player sees where they need to go. And it doesn't always have to be displayed in the center of the screen, or maintained in front of the player, but it should be naturally within the player's view, especially when they enter into a new area. This is already done in many parts of the game. There is a natural flow, and you see where you need to go next, and where to jump. The flow and momentum are maintained. So design your layouts and levels architecture in such a way that when the player enters into this new playable space, their next location to go is clear. Especially for parts where high rate of speed, movement, and decision making are vital, such as any chase sequences. I'm going to leave you with this last example of what a natural effortless flow and momentum looks like. This is the chase sequence in the Kruger chapter, and the first time I played it, I did not have any problems running from one place to another, and in my opinion it was the best done chase sequence where I knew exactly where to go and the path effortlessly unfolded right in front of me.
this one.
Hey guys, long story short, I've been in the thick of it with my game Twisted Tower, meaning I can't say too much, but we're wrapping up the game, and man, it has been a brutal summer. So much feedback, so many complaints, so many good things, so many not so good things.
Level design, but he gives tips that I wrote in my notes.
Constructive criticism all around, right? And we're trying to make this game amazing. Right now, it is looking so good. And it didn't get there just by accident. It was actually through 6 game design principles. And these game design principles, if I'm being completely honest with you, I learned these 6 game design principles this year. We've been working on this game for 3 years. I learned them this year. And I don't want you to do what I've done. I don't want you to make the mistakes I've made and spend 2 years making horrible decisions about game design and only come to the last year of development and have to fix it all. And we did fix it all. And so I'm going to tell you these 6 game design principles. And I think these are going to change your entire outlook on your game. And they're going to help your game actually be fun, but more importantly, cheaper to make. Cheaper to make. Because at the end of the day, if you're only focusing on what really matters for your game, that means you don't focus on the other stuff, aka feature creep, and spend way more time than you should. So you're going to learn from my mistakes here. Let's jump into this. The first mistake, okay, or the first principle really that I've learned is show the problem before the solution, okay? Now, if you show the problem before the solution, what that means is the player feels like they solved the problem. So number one, you've got reward, right? So for example, in our game, Twisted Tower, I'm not even joking, and this is embarrassing to say, but it's true.
So I talked about this earlier in the stream. I would try to find the other points.
It's more complex than you think. As the developer, the second game design principle I've learned, your level is and this is 2D or 3D, it doesn't matter. Your level or the level design is 5 times more complex than you think. As the developer, it's 5 times more complicated than you think. This was so true with Twisted Tower during development or during testing. Players would spend an hour in one area when I thought it was going to take like 20 minutes. They'll get lost, they'll backtrack and go to a previous level. They'll get frustrated and bored and quit if the level is too complicated. Now, it's okay. Like this principle is not necessarily a bad thing. For example, towards the end of your game, when you have a really challenging level, that's kind of cool that it's 5 times more complicated, right? That means it's difficult and challenging, and maybe something that maybe a puzzle box or something they need to solve. And mazes, frankly, aren't a terrible thing, as long as you're not introducing it at the beginning of your game. And so this is why the beginning of your game is always the most important. It also takes the most development time. The beginning of your game is where you're teaching the player about the game. So you don't want them to get lost immediately or give them too much of a challenge, unless it's Dark Souls. Give them too much of a challenge at the beginning of your game. And it's 5 times more complicated than you think. Why? Because you made it, right? So no matter how hard you try to be sympathetic to the player, you can never fully grasp how they see your world. You see it through a totally different lens. You see it through the bird's eye lens or view, right? You see the top down, even when you're playing in first person, or even when you're scrolling in side scroller. You know the big picture. So you're never gonna fully understand what a player is seeing because you have the full context, okay? What does that mean? It means simplify your levels. It's okay. Simplify them, dumb them down. In fact, with Twisted Tower, we had a level that we cut in half, and we did it in an hour. Just cut stuff, just deleted stuff, because it was unnecessary, and it was at the beginning of the game. And now the game feels so much better. Number 3, giving the player mechanical choices, as opposed to world or level design choices, is a bigger bang for your buck. I know this one's a little confusing. Let me try to explain. So with my games, Pinstripe, Neversong, and Twisted Tower, all of these games, I rarely ever created mechanical choices for the player. So like, you get this weapon or you get this weapon. You right click for this ability and you left click for this ability. You purchase a secondary fire, right? When you hold space, you do a super jump, or you can do a fast jump, right? Like all these different options. When you sprint and crouch, you slide, right? All these different mechanical options, giving the player what? A choice on how they play the game. This seems so obvious to me now. But seriously, I got away with this for the last decade of not worrying about this stuff, right? And frankly, I put band-aids on my games, and those band-aids were music, story, the mood, right? And the player didn't really have much of a mechanical choice on how they played the game. Instead, I would focus on world choices. So I would give them like multiple paths they could go down, right? Or let them choose one door over another door, or let them backtrack in a different way. Now, that's cool. It's fun to give the player pathing choices in your game, but you get a bigger bang for your buck when you just integrate a secondary fire into the weapon, for example. Or you integrate a different kind of jump depending on how the player presses space, right? Giving them upgrades for weapons. Sure, it takes time and effort. In fact, it probably takes more time and effort to make a mechanical choice than a world choice, right? It might take more time for one mechanical choice, but the value is so much bigger because the player is going to be able to experience that mechanical choice throughout the entire game in all kinds of situations, as opposed to just focusing on one, pathing choice, okay? So try your best to focus on giving the player mechanical choices, options, ways to play the game. I know this seems obvious, but so many people don't do this, including me, and I didn't do it for 10 years. Okay? Number 4. And by the way, when I'm saying all this, I know it's embarrassing because I should know all this, but I don't. And I'm just being honest with you. If the player doesn't, no, this is number 4. If the player doesn't learn something that can be used to their advantage in the future, they will get bored. If the player doesn't learn something that they can use to their advantage in the future, they will get bored. This is why telegraphing is fun. Okay, telegraphing in your.
I'm trying to reword it to put it in my notes. Because you say a lot, and I rewrite it better. I think it's better the way I write its previous one. Give new mechanics in a level rather than new rooms to explore.
Enemies to their advantage in the future, they will get bored. This is why telegraphing is fun. Okay, if the player learns something that can be used to their advantage in the future, they will get bored.
This is similar to the first he said about the was the first one is the key. Goes reward collectibles, consumable, collectible. I remember I need to check this. I will make it to do. To do lexicon search level design lexicon collectibles consumables Easter egg. I want to know if there are what are the others if I miss, and I would add them. And where did I put it? I think it started with a don't add too much information. Don't make it too symmetrical. Don't make it big. Don't make level too open. Don't show the solution before the problem. Yeah, it was this one. I will separate it. And what do you say?
If I don't learn something, but I don't.
It's similar.
And I'm just being honest with you. If the player doesn't, no, this is number 4. If the player doesn't learn something that can be used to their advantage in the future, they will get bored. If the player doesn't learn something that they can use to their advantage in the future, they will get bored. This is why telegraphing is fun. Okay, telegraphing in your enemies, aka your enemy shows an animation, plays a sound, and stops and prepares to attack. If that's randomized, it's not fun. Now this is so weird. It's weird because why is this weird? It's weird because I should know this. I should know this, but I didn't know this, and so I'm kind of embarrassed by it. But
enemies.
In my previous games, I thought it was cool to randomize enemies. Okay, so give this enemy, they both look the same, but this one's a little bit weirder than this one. This one's faster, this one's slower, right? This one attacks faster, this one attacks slower. This is a terrible idea, at least for most games, okay? Now, if you're in a specific genre that you want to randomize enemies, then I guess that's your prerogative. But for most games, you want the player to learn how an enemy behaves, and then you want to then give the player the option to take advantage of what they've learned. And so they feel like they're becoming better at the game. It's pretty straightforward, right? So telegraphing is one way to do this, right? But it's also just about really good teaching, okay? So teaching the player about the game, and that brings me to my next point. The fifth game design principle I've learned is don't be afraid to just tell the player what's going on, okay? So the way I used to make my games is I wanted every teaching moment to be integrated into the world so that it doesn't break immersion. Okay, so an example of this is Half-Life. Half-Life does this really, really well. Everything you learn is pretty much just learned in the world, or an NPC tells you, but they tell you in a...
With in French, I think, rather than in English live stream, I talked about this. I remember in my 3D modeling course, I had a level design course at the beginning, and the teacher said, Mario Bros. Intro, when you start in the old Mario Bros, you have it's like a mini tutorial without words, and many game designer, level designer are said that is like a perfect way to teach without words. And this guy is talking about how he liked the idea and was trying to apply it to his game, but he says that don't be afraid to, when it doesn't work, just use a board that says to the user how to use your game, because the user are not, you might not do a Mario game. Mario game is very simple. It's an old game, and we are in an era of more complicated games. There are games that are loved because they are complicated. So don't be afraid to tell the user. That's his point.
With a world building flair, as opposed to just being almost meta and telling the player exactly what to do, right? Now that's cool, and frankly, I would rather that be how you teach the player about a mechanic than some like overlay. But I just want to say it's okay to do an overlay, especially as indies. So for me, we had I think 5 or 6 different mechanics in the game in Twisted Tower where we would have beta testers play the game and they had no idea what was going on. And no matter how hard I tried to explain it in the world visually, they just didn't get it. And it really threw a wrench in the whole game because they were confused. And so they got confused once, and then 20 minutes later they get confused again, and then they get confused again and again and again. And the confusion stacks up to a point where they get frustrated because they almost feel blind playing the game. So don't be afraid to just tell the player what's going on. So that's what I told myself. I said, all right, I'm not gonna be afraid of this anymore. I'm giving you a freaking overlay. And I put the overlay on screen when they enter a trigger zone and it says, this is this. This is how you use it. Press X for X, right? Very, very straightforward. No world building, no NPC trying to teach you. Guys, it's okay to do that. It's okay to use UI and overlays to teach the player what's going on, okay? Number 6, when in doubt, surprise.
Also, it's not so level design. So I put it in brackets that everything that is like let's play test, and mechanics is more programmer, gameplay programmer than level designer.
The player. And I've learned this one this week. We're really focused on the first chapter of the game. I think I've mentioned this, but long story short, the first 10 minutes of your game are so important because it's going to inform the player of what they're going to get. Like for example, I think it's called the mystery box or the and I've learned this. Number 6, when in doubt, surprise the player. And I've learned this one this week. We're really focused on the first chapter of the game. I think I've mentioned this, but long story short, the first 10 minutes of your game are so important because it's going to inform the player of what they're going to get. Like for example, I think it's called the mystery box or I think it's called the mystery box principle or something. I'll just make it up. It's the mystery box principle. If you show the player a mystery at the beginning of the game, then they're going to work 5 to 10 hours to solve that mystery, okay? So for example, White Lotus is a great TV show. White Lotus it tells you that somebody died. And then you meet the cast of characters, and so you watch the whole show because you want to know who died. And you were told that at the beginning, okay? So the reason I bring this up is because you want that first 10 minutes of your game to introduce something, some kind of itch, so that the player wants to scratch that itch as they play the game.
What was his title?
Guys, it's okay to do that. It's okay to use UI and overlays to teach the player what's going on, okay? Number 6, when in doubt, surprise the player. And I've learned this one this week. We're really focused on the first chapter of the game. I think I've mentioned this, but long story short, the first 10 minutes of your game are so important because it's going to inform the player of what they're going to get. Like for example, I think it's called the mystery box or I think it's called the mystery box principle or something. I'll just make it up. It's the mystery box principle. If you show the player a mystery at the beginning of the game, then they're going to work 5 to 10 hours to solve that mystery, okay? So for example, White Lotus is a great TV show. White Lotus it tells you that somebody died. And then you meet the cast of characters, and so you watch the whole show because you want to know who died. And you were told that at the beginning, okay? So the reason I bring this up is because you want that first 10 minutes of your game to introduce something, some kind of itch, so that the player wants to scratch that itch as they play the game. Admittedly, no matter how hard you try to ensure that is a really enticing introduction to the game, there are moments that are going to get boring, okay? And so when in doubt, when you feel like the player might be bored or they might get kind of exhausted by something that's repetitive, surprise the player, okay? And we call them twists in our game because it's called Twisted Tower. And so
I have a similar point somewhere. Break. I will need to put this into the flow layout. Where did I put that? It's there. And this one is to keep the flow. This one is to break repeating pattern to make parts of the game memorable. Break repeating pattern. It's not the same thing. The pattern is more like the shape. He's talking about more like events when the pitch becomes boring, surprise the player.
So you want to twist. You want to do something that's twisted or change. So for example, let's say you understand your gameplay loop. The gameplay loop is, let's say, collect 100 coins, insert the coins into a vending machine and get a star, and the star takes you to the next level, okay? Let's just say that's your loop. Well, maybe on the 3rd level, the vending machine explodes, right? And you have to go find all 5 pieces of the vending machine to put it back together. So we're just introducing a surprise. It's pretty straightforward. Honestly, it can be as simple as a jump scare, right? If you're making a horror game or an immersive sim. Or it can be that you know, one of the enemies, this is something we've done in our game, one of the enemies, instead of them being prepared to attack you, they're actually waving at you. Hey, they're just smiling at you. And as you approach, then you do a jump scare, right? Stuff like that, where you take the current system you have, the mechanics you have, and the loop you have, and then you just create little pops and changes in those mechanics, okay? I'll give you a bonus here. So bonus design principle. And this is, I think, it's the one that I've used the most in the last 10 years. Throw in funsies. I'll explain what those are. Throw in funsies in dry spots, okay? So this is similar to number 6, but it's less of a surprise, and it's more of just an additional feature, okay? So with my game Neversong, it was fine. The game was fine. And I remember one day going, I want to be able to hit pinwheels with a hammer, or with my baseball bat. It was a baseball bat. And it was a side scroller. So now we put all these pinwheels throughout the game. And so when you whack these pinwheels, they spin and they emit particles. And it's a really fun sound. They have no function in the game. Yet for some reason, the game was like twice as fun. And that's because the player, when there's something subconscious that happens when the player's feeling bored, or they're getting a little annoyed with how repetitive the game is. And honestly, that's just gonna happen. When they start getting annoyed, they go, you know, I'm gonna go whack some pinwheels. And you give them the option to get a serotonin boost or something by just going and messing with some funsie. So this, we have these in Twisted Tower, just pumpkins that you can smash with your hammer, right? Also, interactables, you can include like even a newspaper you can read, or a painting that you can observe. Stuff like that is, I would consider that an interactable, or maybe even a funsie, right? Just something that's...
One guy called them set pieces, at funsies, set pieces. I will find a name that is very suitable. This is dynamic make assets like destroyable thing asset to break the repetitive actions of the game. I will add destroyable asset to my list because it's a good idea. It's a very good idea to add destroyables. Also, when you do playtests, look at what the players play with, and like if you put like a thing on a wall just for decoration, and all the playtests the player pick or try to interact with, take note and do make an interaction that they can play with.
It's kind of irrelevant for the game. So that's really 7 game design principles that I've learned. These are so important to me. And I was able to write these down in like 5 seconds because they've been rumbling through my head all year as we've been wrapping up Twisted.
I will go take not a break, but that will be it for tonight. In my English, I will go do my French version. So thank you for watching, and see you in tomorrow. It would be tomorrow. It's Thursday, so I think I would try to do more, but it seems like my days are getting shorter. But that's it. We will just do a 3rd episode if I haven't finished, and that will be it. Thank you for watching, and see you